Word. Here we go.
Recording in progress. Okay.
Tonight, shiur Lilu Nishmat Avimari Dober Mer Benuin Alevi Imi Marati Rachel Bat Harav Michael. Tonight's shiur is also Lilu Nishmat Mayor Leib Red Reuven, Rhonda's father, Manuel Leon Kruger. Wow, it's 30 years. No, it's 29. It's wait a minute, 96. It's 29 years this year. Okay.
Hmm.
This week we have the privilege of reading Parshat VaYigash, and Parshat VaYigash, it to me is has one of the most, I think, compelling stories in all of Tanakh, and it raises more questions than it answers, because really this is I would say is the climax of the Yosef and his brothers story. Even though we still have another parasha to go in Vayechi, really it's the climax. And we're going to read basically, firstly, I want to just quote a midrash, and then we'll get into the story here, a storyline. This is a midrash from Tehillim. It's also available. It's also similar midrashim are found in the Yerushalmi as well as in Midrash Rabbah on Bereshit. But this was the one that, to me, was the easiest, similar, most easy to quote. The pasuk in Tehillim Kaf Kuf Hey says, "Vayikra Rav El Haaretz." Hakadosh Baruch Hu called a famine in the land. This parak deals about Am Yisrael going down to Egypt, and the following midrash. Amar Yehuda bar Nachmani b'shem Rabbi Shimon Lakish. Rabbi Yehuda bar Nachmani says b'shem Rabbi Lakish. Roi haya Yaakov lered b'Mitzrayim shel shalaot shel barzel. In reality, it was appropriate. It should have happened that Yaakov was carried down to Egypt in chains, in iron chains, as presumably as an exile, being kidnapped, captured, presumably during some type of armed conflict, or as we would have said today, as a hostage, either a prisoner or a hostage, whatever term you'd like to use. The Asa Kadosh Baruch Hu Kama Mangnaot Kedelo Rida Bichvodo. HaKadosh Baruch Hu had to do many gyrations in order that Yaakov should be brought down honorably rather than dishonorably as some type of prisoner hostage. The Kach Nemar, therefore, the pasuk says, "Vayikra Rav al haaretz." HaKadosh Baruch Hu called a famine to the land. The Kol Kach Lama. What was the purpose of the famine? Vayavo Yisrael Mitzrayim, that the Jewish people, that Yaakov himself and all of his offspring, all of his family, should end up in Eretz Mitzrayim. Amar Pinchas HaKohen, Pinchas HaKohen Bechama says the following: Mashal lefara shemavakshim limshoch oto limekulin shalah. The example he gives a mashal of a cow that the owner wanted to bring it into its stall, and he was pulling it. It didn't want to come. She didn't want to come. So what did they do? Mashlu benat chila. So first they took her calf and brought the calf in, and so she ran after the calf to go follow him. Just so too, before Yaakov arrived in Egypt, HaKadosh Baruch Hu did many gyrations. Yosef confirmed that Yosef and his brothers were involved in all of this story. Yosef the Mitzrayim, so that Yosef should end up in Egypt. And then Yaakov would follow him to Egypt. So HaKadosh Baruch Hu, basically, because he did not want Yaakov to be brought down dishonorably, we have this whole story with the brothers. By the way, this does not absolve the brothers from anything, but that's an interesting measure I just wanted to have in the back. Now, one of the things, I'm going to go through the Pesukim, but this really is not the beginning of the parsha. The parsha begins with Yehuda's plea on behalf of Binyamin, and basically Yehuda's entire focus in his monologue to Yosef is, Benjamin stole the cup. I'm not even going to argue whether he's guilty or it was planted or this was a plant. I'm not going to argue that. I'm just going to simply say he's got to go home because I promised my father he would get home safely. and I'll stay in his place. End of discussion. That's his whole point, is that final verse. He says, now let him go up with his brothers and I'll stay in his place. Now he goes through a lot of emotional tearing at the heartstrings before he gets to that point, all of which are to convince this person sitting opposite him, who he has no clue is Yosef, okay, to accept his request. Now, the questions that this parsha raises are numerous, but we're going to first want to go through, this is the beginning of chapter 45, where Yosef reveals himself to his brothers, and I want to go through the Pesukim, and then we're going to see what some of the Parshanim have to say. And I'm telling you right now, there are going to be questions that are not going to get answered, that I still haven't really found some good answers. I mean, the Midrashim try to find answers for, but I'm not sure that any of them really get to the heart of the issue here. So let's go begin. Chapter 45, verse 1. Lo yachol Yosef lihit apek, which is generally translated, Yosef was no longer able to hold back his emotions. L'chol hanitzavim alav, in front of all those who were gathered in front of him. VaYikra, and he called out, Hotziu chol ish me'alai, everybody leave the room. V'lo amad ish ito, nobody stood with him. V'ada Yosef elachav, when Yosef made himself known to his brothers. He raised his voice is in crying. Vayishmu Mitzrayim, and Egypt heard. Vayishma Beit Paro, and the house of Pharaoh heard. Vayomer Paro el Yosef, Elachav, ani Yosef. Yosef said to his brothers, I am Joseph, ha'od avi chai. Is my father still alive? V'lo yochlu echav lanot oto, his brothers were not able to answer him. Ki nivhalu mi panav, because they were completely confused in front of him. Now I want to pause right here because I want to focus on this word nivhalu. Bela is confusion. Why were the brothers confused? Again, the Parshanim want to suggest about a bunch of different things, but clearly we have to understand the brothers have been to Egypt. They wanted to buy food. They meet this guy, an Egyptian guy, speaking to them through an interpreter, so they assume he does not know any Hebrew, speaking to them through an interpreter, and he is clearly dressed and carries himself as an Egyptian. They don't have any clue who he is other than some Egyptian guy who's in charge of the sale of the thing. Now, we the reader, and the studier, a student of this, have been following Yosef for the last 20 years. We know what's been happening to Yosef for these 20 years. The brothers haven't seen him in 20 years, 22 years. They have no clue what's happened to him. They may have tried to find him when they got to Egypt, but then are immediately charged with spying, so that put the kibosh on them doing any investigative work and asking around. So they are completely blindsided, I would assume, when suddenly this person blurts out, I'm Joseph. So the fact that they are speechless, they're not able to answer him, is hardly astonishing. They are completely taken aback. They have no way to answer him. Even assuming that they had an inkling that this was Joseph, they just had no response to this statement. Now, clearly, Yosef's question, Ha'od Avichai, seems very strange because Judah, in his entire speech, his whole focus of his speech is that Benjamin's got to go back because otherwise his father's going to die of not seeing him. The fact that we come back without him, he's going to die immediately. So clearly he's still alive. So Yosef's question seems to be almost a rhetorical question of Ha'od Avichai, is my father still alive? We'll see how the Parshanim deal with that one. Okay, so the parsha continues. Again, as I said, Yosef reveals himself. The brothers have no response. So Yosef says, okay, what's going on? Yosef Elachav. So Yosef again initiates the conversation. He says, Gishu no Eli, come closer to me. VaYigash, they come closer. Vayomer ani Yosef achichem. He says, I am Yosef. Not remember in Pasuk Gimel, he says, ani Yosef, I'm Joseph. Here he says, I'm Joseph, your brother, that you sold me toward Egypt. Remember that. He's pointing out something that will Again, theoretically should prove he's Joseph, because who else would have known that there was any sale involved when he got to get him here? However, Yosef, before the brothers even have a chance now to respond to what he's saying, he says, wait a minute, don't be sad, and don't be angry that you sold me here. Because God has sent me here to keep everybody alive. God has sent me before you to keep everybody alive. You know that the last 2 years we've been having this terrible famine. God has already foretold that there's going to be 5 more years of no plowing, no reaping, no harvest. So it's going to be a while yet to get over this famine. God sent me in front of you, in order for there to be placed to you a she'erit ba'aretz, a remnant in the land, and that you should survive with you need great resources. Remember, this is a family, it's grown, it's not thousands of people yet, but it's grown. It's not just a couple. It's a couple with 12 kids, 70 total people, plus all their cattle or sheep. If they're going to survive a 5-year famine, they need more resources than they have available. That's what Yosef is saying. The atah, and now, you should have to understand, again, this is all Yosef speaking. He hasn't given them a chance to speak. I mean, they had a chance to speak, but they couldn't say anything, and so Yosef is now continuing to encourage them. The atah, now you must understand, lo atem shlach motihena, you're not the ones who sent me here, ki Elokim, but it's God who sent me here. Vayisimeni li'av leFaro, he has made me into some type of father figure to Pharaoh. We'll see what Av means and what the parshat are going to say Av means. But literally it means he's made me a father to Pharaoh. Not a father in the sense of a biological father, a father in the sense of somebody who Pharaoh listens to his advice. Exactly. Uliadon l'chol beito, and there's the master of his entire household. Not only Adu Moshel b'chol eretz Mitzrayim, he's given me rule, dominion over the whole Egypt. Maharu, hasten v'alu alavi, and go up back to my father Eretz Yisrael. V'amartim elav, and tell him, Kol mar b'necha Yosef. This is what your son Joseph says. Samani Elokim, God has placed me l'adon l'chol Mitzrayim as the master over all Egypt. Ridah Eli, come down to me al tamo. Don't stay in Canaan. V'yashavta b'Eretz Goshen, you will live in the land of Goshen, not in Egypt proper, but in the land of Goshen. Vayitam karov Eli, you'll be close to me, but not directly in where I'm living. Ata, you, vanecho, vnei vanecho, your sons and your grandsons. V'tzoncha v'karcha v'chol hashalach, and bring your sheep and cattle and everything you got. This is not just come visit for a week. This is come permanently, take everything with you. V'chilkalti odcha, and I will support you there in Goshen. Because there are 5 more years left to this famine. Lest you become impoverished, you and your household and all that belong to you. And now he continues. That was all his message to his father. Now he continues to his brothers. Behold, your eyes see look in front of you. And the eyes of my brother Binyamin. I stopped going through the interpreter. As soon as I said, Ani Yosef, I'm talking to you directly. I don't need an interpreter. I speak Hebrew like you guys do. I'm not some strange Egyptian guy here. Okay? Yeah, you don't believe me. I am him. But also you've seen who I am and what power I have in Egypt. And therefore, you have to tell my father, all of the honor I have in Egypt, everything you've seen. And you should hurry and bring down my father. Then, and after he's had this whole speech to his brothers, only then does he fall on Benjamin's shoulders, which is very interesting. The Midrashim have all sorts of comments about that. And he cries. And Benjamin cries on his shoulder. By the way, this is the first point we should see anything with Benjamin other than him being a pawn in the whole game. It's the first thing the time he shows up as an actual person doing something. Then he hugs all his brothers. kisses all his brothers and cries upon them by Acharechein, and only after this do the brothers speak to him. And then by the way, the Torah continues, and Paro gives some instructions. Ultimately, they go up. But I wanted to focus on this reunion and this long message that Yosef gives to the brothers to wake them out of this stupor that they're in, of disbelief. They totally cannot believe that this is Joseph in front of them, because they're probably sitting there saying, wait a minute, how'd that happen? Right? They're not only saying, how did that happen? But if this is Joseph, then why did he put us through all this? Why didn't he just tell us the first time we came down here? That's what I'd be thinking. I mean, if I'm the brothers, my first question is, wait a minute. We came down, we've been here before. Why did he insist that we have to bring Benjamin? Why didn't you say I'm Joseph and go home and bring Daddy down then? Why now? That's the first question. The second question, which is a very, very interesting one, is did Joseph intend to reveal himself to his brothers at this point or not? And if he did, then at least we can understand this whole thing. He's got this whole plan prepared. I'm going to reveal myself to my brothers, and we're going to bring Dad and the whole family down because we got this famine to deal with. Or is this all Joseph spontaneously figuring this out on the go because he really had no intention of revealing himself to his brothers? Another great question. I don't know that we'll get to answering that. So as I said, I'm going to raise more questions than I'm going to answer, but it gives you food for thought. The other question is, Joseph's in this position of power. He's been there now for the whole 7 years of plenty, and we're into the second year of the famine. So he's been the second in command of Egypt for 9 years. Granted, when he was in prison, he didn't have a whole lot of ability to do things, but he's had 9 years. Why didn't he send hi, Dad, I'm okay. I'm in, no letter, no nothing, no communication whatsoever with his father for 9 years. I understand the first 13. Okay, he was a servant. Even though he was in charge of the household, he probably couldn't sneak off and send a message. Then he's in prison. But for 9 years, he's been second in command to Pharaoh. Not a single word to his father. Very, very strange. By the way, the Mefarshim try to deal with it. And some of the answers are some of them are way, way out. Some of them are very, very way, way out. And others are even more way, way out. Okay. Maybe at the end, depending on how much time goes, I may get to a couple of them, but I'm not sure that I will. So let's go. And I want to first, as I said, I want to analyze this parsha of Yosef and the brothers, and this Yosef talking to his brothers, and the brothers being, like, what's going on here? This can't possibly have happened. This can't be happening. We must be dreaming, right? So anyway, so here's Rashi. Rashi very simply is going to address what is going on with Yosef and what is it he's trying to protect the brothers from. So firstly, it says, Lo yachol Yosef litapek chol hadizvim. He couldn't hold back. Lo hayachol lisbol. He was not able to consider himself shiur mitzrayim nitzavim alav v'shovim shechav mitpaishim b'hodo elav. Yosef's first and foremost concern is nobody can be here when I don't want any of these Egyptians to be here when I tell my brothers who I am, because it'll be very embarrassing to my brothers when I say what I'm going to say. So I can't do this. Okay, so that's Rashi's first comment. Vayishma Beit Paro. No, it says first that Egypt heard, then it's heard the household of house of Pharaoh. Rashi just tells us it doesn't mean the house of Pharaoh, that the walls heard. Beito shel Paro kalamar v'adav v'nei Beito. It just means that his household heard, not that the house heard. Okay. Okay. Nivhalumi panav. Now Rashi says very simply they were confused in front of him mitnei habusha, because of the embarrassment that they were now suffering. Hey, wait a minute. Here's this guy, we thought we'd get rid of him, and here he is. He can get rid of us if he wants to, right? But he doesn't. But okay. Now, why does Joseph have to tell them to approach? He says, Geshunoi, like, come closer to me. Ra otam nisugim lachoreim. He saw that they were starting to back away from him. Amrachshav achai nichlamim. They are very, very embarrassed. Karel Embaroshan Rakav Etachdunim, he says, please come close, not to worry. Veheralahem Shumahu. And Rashi says very simply, he showed him that he had his Brit Milah. so that they would believe that he was Joseph, not some Egyptian who was masquerading as Joseph. So that's a very interesting comment that Rashi makes, again, from the Midrash. He doesn't make it up himself. Okay, Li'av, he says, what is it? By the way, we said Av meaning an advisor. Rashi says very simply, Chaver, an associate, patron. That's why I love this Rashi. Patron. He's now a patron of Paro. Okay, why does he have to go? Why? It's interesting. Also, Yosef tells us Va'alu elavi, to go up to my father, because Eretz Yisrael gavon mikol artzos. Eretz Yisrael is spiritually higher than any other land, not necessarily physically higher. And Rashi again says, you can see with your eyes all the honor I've got. You can see that I'm your brother because I've also got a Brit Milah. By the way, some of the Parshim ask, wait a minute, what do you mean? Jews aren't the only ones who get Brit Milah. Ishmaelites also, right? But Egyptians didn't. So anyway, you can see that I'm speaking Hebrew to you. Again, there are Parshim we're going to see later on who say, what proof is that? He wasn't the only person in Egypt who spoke Hebrew. Okay? However, here is what he says. The eyes of my brother Binyamin. Why is that? Why would that be more Hishvet kulam yachad? He puts Benjamin together with all the other brothers. What is that to say? Lomar, to tell them, Shem she'ainli sin al Binyamin achi. I have nothing to hate Binyamin. Firstly, he's his full brother. Secondly, he wasn't there when this whole thing happened back in parshat VaYigash. He was home with his Abba. He was a little kid. Shari lo yavim mechirati. He wasn't around. So therefore I have no reason to be angry or hate him, right? Kach ein belibi sin aleichem. So too I have no anger or jealousy or hurt against you either. So again, Yosef is, by comparing them all to Binyamin, he's trying to show them that I know you guys tried to get rid of me, but let's forget about that. Let's forget the past. I'm ready to move forward. I'm ready to forgive you all and move forward. Okay, Rashi brings down, by the way, the Midrashim. Why does he cry on Binyamin's two shoulders, both of his shoulders? Al shnei mikdashot shatidim liot l'chalko shel Binyamin v'sovel necharev. The two Beit Mikdash that are going to be in Binyamin's portion that are ultimately, he sees prophetically, are going to be destroyed. And Binyamin cries on his because the Mishkan Shiloh, which is going to be in Yosef's portion, is going to be destroyed. Nice Midrash. Again, trying to explain why he cried on both shoulders rather than just crying on one shoulder. Again, Tzavar also really, Tzavar really means the neck rather than the shoulder. I mean, I'm translating it shoulder because that's the way I view it, as him falling on his shoulder crying. But in reality, it means neck. And they say, did Binyamin have two necks? Which, how could he have had, right? So, the left side, yeah, okay. But anyway, Rashi gives this Midrashic interpretation. Okay. Again, and after Yosef is finally done all this, then the brothers are willing to speak to him. And originally they're embarrassed. Okay? All right, Rashbam. What does it mean? He was unable to hold himself back. He could no longer hold himself back. Again, we had in the previous portion where before Binyamin gets there, he's holding himself back from his emotions back. Ki adata till now he was everything he was doing. He was holding all of his emotions inside him. He held back when he went to have this meal with the brothers. So there are a number of times where it's clear that Yosef is holding his emotions back, and he's trying to maintain control over his emotions to make sure that the brothers bring Binyamin there. Why he wants that's a whole different story. For a different time. What does that mean to all those that were standing in front of him? Rashbam says, he was no longer able to hold himself back because there were so many people in this room. And he calls his servants, his attendants. Everybody's got to leave. That's the simple meaning of the text. Vayishmu Mitzrayim, the Egyptians heard. What does that mean? Anshe ha'ir, they didn't hear what Yosef was saying. They heard Yosef crying. That much they heard, but that was all. And so basically the news spreads very quickly. Everything that happened to me was Hashem acting for your benefit, Yosef tells the brothers. Because okay, so basically it's you haven't sent me here. Elo Elokim. Hashem's the one who sent me here. Okay. Okay. That I am speaking directly to you. Because up until this point, where Yosef says, I'm Joseph, up until that point, all of his conversations had been through an interpreter. Even when Yehuda is speaking, he's speaking to the interpreter who is interpreting to Yosef. When the brothers are speaking back in last week's parshat, all of the discussions are through an interpreter. Well, if he ikar pshuto, main interpretation is Besura Shatomer Li Avi Lobi Pishmor Shishmatim Achim. I want you, this message I have to give my father. I don't want you to hear from anybody else but directly from me. Shariatem Beinechem Ro'im Umakirim Ken Yosef Achichem Medaber Alechem. You can see with your eyes and hear and recognize that I'm Joseph, your brother, speaking to you. Well, and therefore, we got something called for the Mitzrayim Klosh Sharitam. You have to then tell my father all that you're seeing, but you're seeing it directly because I'm speaking directly to you. Okay. All everything that I've accomplished in Egypt, he should not be afraid to come. I have the resource. I'm able to get the resources to provide for him while he's here, and everything will be okay. Radak is very interesting here. Although Yosef was unable. Why? Since Yehuda mentioned numerous times, Ra'at Aviv Sheyimtza'enu, the evil that would happen to his father if Binyamin did not come back, Nichmeru Racham of Allah. He was very emotional about the harm that his father might suffer if he didn't allow Binyamin to go home. And therefore, he was having very hard time holding back the tears, holding back crying. Because of all the people around that were all the Egyptians in the room, he says, everybody leave. And he calls it out loud. In other words, even the attendants who were like the sergeant at arms to clear the room, they themselves understood that he didn't want them to be there either. And the Fish Amar Kolish, since he said everybody, they went when they asked everybody else to leave, they kind of left with them so that Yosef didn't have to ask a second time. However, the Egyptians, as they left, Shamu Kol Habachi, they heard Yosef break out in crying. And again, news travels fast. But that was all they heard. They didn't hear the whole story yet because Yosef now asked his brother to come closer so he can speak to them. Kishuno Eli. Because, as I said, in Pasuk Gimel, he says to come closer. Kivin Sharotam Niv Halim. He saw they were completely confused when he says, I'm Joseph. He calls them to come closer and not to be afraid. The medrash that says he showed him that he was circumcised in order that they should believe everything he's going to tell them. Your eyes can see. You now that you know I'm Yosef, you should recognize me. You should, just like when the brothers first get there the first time, it says twice that Yosef recognizes him. And one opinion says that the first time he recognized them because he saw all of them together. And then the second time he recognized them, he was able to pick out each of them. Remember, he hadn't seen them at that point. He hasn't seen them in 20 plus years. So, and they all were, in their teens when he left. They were teens, late teens, early 20s when he left. So now they're all 35, 40. There's a vast difference between being able to recognize a group and saying, okay, yeah, they're my brothers. Between, oh wait, that's Reuben, that's Shimon, that's Levi, that's Yehuda. Because again, especially if we assume that probably they had some physical similarities, at least, sometimes you can see, I know, some of my cousins the brothers look so much alike. I can see a picture of one from a distance and I say, wait, is that this one or that one? Same thing here, perhaps. And then later, so here, for them now to recognize him, they've got to mentally take the beard off, take the clothes off, and look at his face, which is, again, takes time. Okay? And then he says, now you can recognize that I'm speaking to you in Hebrew. I'm not only speaking Hebrew, but I'm speaking the Hebrew that you recognize. You see, it's one thing to speak English, it's another to speak American, it's another to speak South African. He's saying, even if you say there are lots of people who speak Hebrew, I know how we spoke Hebrew at home. The only way I can know that is if I'm Yosef, right? Up until now, I've been speaking to this interpreter because I was trying to hide who I was. I didn't want to reveal myself yet to you until it was time. Okay. Vayipol, why does he fall first on Binyamin's shoulders and cry? They were full brothers, whereas all the others were only half brothers. They were closer to each other. Also, they're the two youngest of all the brothers. Very simply, he doesn't go into this midrashic interpretation. They simply were crying. They were overcome with emotion. Binyamin was, 8, 9 years old when Yosef, his teenage brother, disappears. He's 10 years younger. He's now seeing him for the first time as an adult. Obviously he's overcome with emotion. So then Radak says that's what it's all about. It's none of this Beit Mikdash and Nevuah and whatever wonderful midrashim. But basically, they are overcome with emotion of seeing each other after all these years, especially when Binyamin had no idea that Yosef is still alive. The brothers perhaps may have known that Yosef may have been still alive, but Binyamin had no idea because he was home with Daddy, and when they came to Yaakov, they said, hey, we found the coat. What's happened to Yosef? And Yaakov felt he was gone. He would never see him again. So Binyamin, obviously, as the young kid, probably felt the same way. So the fact that he now suddenly sees his brother, wow, came back from the dead. So you would understand him being very emotional. Okay. Vayevk, I know, interesting then it says that Yosef falls on his brothers, and Vayevk alehem, he cries on them. They did not cry. They were still too confounded and confused and embarrassed. Hey, wow, how did he get here? How did this happen? Now, after that, after Yosef cries with each of them and hugs and kisses them, now they speak to him. Kiva and Radak says, what did they talk about? What do you mean he speaks to them? Kivin shenashak lahem ubacha aliyam. After he kissed them, he cries on them. Yadu ki libo imam. They suddenly understood that he had completely forgiven them. He wanted to be their full brother. He was ready to forgive all the past. Vishalu, and now they said, oh, if that's the case, let's find what's been going on? What's been happening in the last 20 years, Joseph? And they asked, tell us what's going on from the time you left us. How did you get to this position? How did you manage to come the second in command in Egypt? How did that happen? What's been going on? Wow. Okay. Ramban has a different approach to why Yosef is so overcome with emotion and what he's unable to hold back. Ramban says very simply, it says Yosef was not able to hold back, not because of the brothers, not because of what Yehuda said, but because of all of the Egyptians that are in the room witnessing Judah's plea to him. First he quotes Rashi. I'm sorry. He wasn't able to. Rashi simply says that he was not able to. He was overcome because he did not want the Egyptians to witness his brothers being embarrassed. Fine. Rabbi Avram Amar litapek lisbol. Rabbi Ezra says that the word litapek means to bear it. He was no longer able to bear the weight of all of these people all around him. Tamo. The reason is he would have wanted to wait to have his brothers alone with him by people leaving on their own, but he didn't have the emotional ability to remain calm until everybody left. So he had to force people to leave. To be strong. He was not able to strengthen himself and retain his control over his emotional. He could not strengthen himself to maintain his composure with everybody there. Now, this is what Ramban says, very simply. There were, again, Yosef, he's not alone in his house when the brothers come. He's got attendants, he's got, ministers there. Anashim Rabim, there were many people, Yacholu Panav Limchol Binyamin. And they are all, having heard Judah's plea, are begging Joseph, oh, you got to have mercy on this person, on Binyamin. You got to listen to that. So there, why is he having trouble with keeping his emotions? Because it's not just Yehuda who's saying this. Everybody around is saying, oh, come on, you got to forgive him. Be kind, let him go back to his father. What's going to happen to you? His poor old father is going to die. You can't do that to him. Okay, so he stole the little cup, so what? He made a mistake. Let him go home. Pardon him. And everybody's pleading with him. Yosef and because all of them are now, quote, ganging up on Yosef to be lenient with Benjamin, he can't hold back. So he calls to his servants, again, the sergeant at arms, move everybody. I want to speak to these people privately. And when as soon as they left the room, Natanet Kolobi, the Chi starts crying immediately, loudly. People, as they were leaving, could hear that Joseph was starting to cry, but that's all they heard. He not only did he want all the bystanders to leave, he wanted all of his attendants to leave also. As we see in other places, that nitzav means somebody who is attending to somebody else. The Tam VaYikra, why does it say VaYikra? He called out, remove everybody. Sheherim kolo bekas v'yamalim b'shartzav hotziu kalish me'alai b'iltiyon hashimoyela. He called out and told them to clear the room completely. The Tam Motza, why did he want the room to be empty except for him and his brothers? He removes everybody, Ramban says, as Rashi said, he did not want anybody to hear when he mentioned the fact that they sold him or that he was sold. Because not only will it be an embarrassment to the brothers, become a love lemichshol, Ramban adds. It'll also create problems for him downstream. What kind of problems? Sheyomru, because the Egyptians, if they find out that his brothers sold him, the Egyptians and Paro's servants are going to say, hey, Elon Shebokdot. These are a bunch of traitors, bunch of treacherous people. They sold their own brother. Lo Yagur B'Artseinu. We don't want them living in our land. These bunch of guys who sell their own brother. Lo Yidrachu B'Armonotenu. We don't want them in our palaces. But if they were treacherous and sold their own brother, and they disregarded completely their father's wishes and were willing to rebel against their father, what are they going to do against Pharaoh and the whole people? And they won't trust Yosef anymore either. So as a result of this, Yosef said, wait a minute. Can't let anybody find out how I got here. Okay, that's off limits. That's taboo. I'll tell you guys, you know about it. You were there. You know about it, but nobody else can know about this. Okay, I thought it was very interesting pshat and Ramban. Okay, let's go. It's getting later than I thought, so we're going to skip a little bit here. Okay. VaYigash Goshen. Raman has a very interesting explanation as to why Yosef suggests they should live in Goshen. Yosef Yodea Aviv. Yosef knew his father well enough. So Yirtze Lamod Be'eretz Mitzrayim Asher Sham Habira L'Malchut. He didn't want to live in the capital city of Egypt, wherever capital was. What do we call it? Cairo. There was what was the ancient name of Cairo? Was I can't remember it off the top of my head. Al Kain Sholach Lo Mi'ata Ki Be'eretz Goshen Yoshivenu. So he's already letting him know before he gets here. Don't worry, you're not going to live in the capital city where all the Egyptians are and all the idolatry is. We're going to put you in your own region in Goshen. Again, I want you to bring everybody down. Okay. All right, we're going to skip the rest of the Ramban. Okay. Very interesting. Okay. Ramban is, as I said, it explains that Rashi wants to say, and everybody, Rashi, Ibn Ezra, Radak, all say that that they were speaking without an interpreter. That's his proof that he's Joseph. Who Targum Unclus, and it's also Unclus's explanation. He just said it as a thing, to calm them down, rather than as an ironclad proof. Ramban says, "What? There's no that just because one person in Egypt speaks Hebrew, that's no proof that he's Joseph. Ki al dati hu sifat Canaan. Where did Hebrew come from? It's in the Canaanite language. It's language that other people spoke in Canaan, not just the Jewish people. Ki Avram lo hivio me'ur kasdim umecharan ki aramidi. God, Avram did not speak Hebrew, that he brought it from Ur Kasdim with him, because they speak Aramaic there. Aramaic is the language in the land where Avram comes from, Haran and Ur Kasdim. And the proof is by when Lavan calls this pillar that they built, he calls it an Aramaic name. Yigar Ve'nenu lashon ish echad levad. Ivrit, what that we call the Hebrew language, is not just the language of one person. Avu lashon Canaan. It was the language spoken by some people in Canaan. Now, Canaan, by the way, can not only mean Canaanites, it can also mean traders. It was a trading language that people spoke so they could communicate with different languages, because people in Egypt didn't speak Aramaic. People in Babylonia didn't speak Egyptian. So they had Canaan, which was where the traders all came from, had its language. That was the trading language. And even if not, we have to say that there were plenty of people in Egypt who spoke Hebrew because it was nearby. Clearly, if they could find an interpreter rather easily, obviously that other people spoke Hebrew. The Avkia Moshel, and certainly the ruler, would speak a language of the nearby countries. Because normally they have enough leisure and enough resources to be able to be educated in multiple languages, and they need it for diplomacy or for whatever. And he brings a proof from Nebuchadnezzar, who also speaks Hebrew in the book of Daniel. Halom chalamti, etc. Okay, and because he's speaking to multiple different people, and they all understood when he spoke in Hebrew. But even though the locals answered him in Aramaic, because he obviously spoke Aramaic, because that was the language of the land. The locals spoke to him in Aramaic. They were the leading advisors. They would speak in their own vernacular. The ode. And similarly, just like Joseph had emigrated or had forcibly been moved from Canaan to Egypt, Yavo Rabim, there were others who moved from Canaan to Egypt. So clearly, the fact that he speaks Hebrew, at least according to Ramban, that doesn't seem to be something that guarantees that he's Yosef. However, the Yoter Hayalahem Raya, the real proof that they know he's Yosef, Paskiro Shemo, by really telling them his Hebrew name, because remember, in Egypt he's Safnat Paneach, he's not Joseph. The Inyan HaMechira, that he told them about the sale, because nobody else in Egypt knew about the original sale. They knew that Potiphar brought him from some tradesman who brought him, but nobody knew about all the original, what happened. So therefore, he says, I'm Yosef who you sold. That's the proof, because nobody else would have known that. Somebody who had bought him and was masquerading as him took his okay. And Ramban says, it appears to me that the proper way to interpret this whole sequence of Joseph's statements, when he says that you're seeing what you're seeing and what Binyamin can see, I'm the ruler in Egypt. That you can clearly see. That you're witnessing. You've already witnessed it. And I'm telling you personally that I'm your brother. And I want you to bring my father down so I can support him. And therefore, I want you to tell Abba all that you've seen, all that you've experienced, and hurry up and bring him down. Because this is the truth. And I have the means to support him and save him during this famine. Okay, and that's why he says, that's what he means. He means, all of this is to prove that he's Yosef. That's why he's saying this. Okay. All right. I'm going to skip this because we're running later than I thought. I'm going to skip the rush also, the later, and pass it over. Okay, Klei Yakar. Ha'od Avichai. Now, Klei Yakar is focusing on why does Yosef ask? The first thing he says, I'm Joseph, is my father still alive? When Yudah's already mentioned his father numerous times, they've mentioned him the first time they came down, they've mentioned the second time he came down. Why is he asking that as his first question? Even though they've just told him, Shuchai, that Yaakov is alive. Kimuvan, he called it Yehuda. Obviously, you just mentioned it, my father's going to die if Binyamin doesn't come home, but he's still very much alive. Mikol Mako. Nonetheless, Chashav Yosef was concerned. Perhaps the whole reason they said this was a false pretense to get him to have Rachmanis. He'll feel sorry for this father of this poor boy. He'll let the boy go. That's why he has to ask them again to confirm that Yaakov is really alive. But they couldn't imagine that he was asking that after Yudah's whole plea. Is he asking that? Ella, they imagine, and this is why they didn't respond. There's no response to that first question. The reason they didn't respond is because when they hear Joseph say that, they are panic-stricken. Ella Shabalas Kir Avonam, that by asking, is my father still alive, he was kind of giving them a dig. That, hey, you guys, 22 years ago, I was asking, how could my father possibly be alive? He's my father, but not your father. You had no regard for his pain over the last 22 years. You got rid of me and you didn't care the fact that was going to have an impact on Abba. That's why they couldn't respond. They had nothing to respond. Another reason they were very, very stressed out when he says, I'm Yosef. He just says, I'm Joseph. Well, I think he was the only person in the world named Joseph? Probably he was, by the way, at that point, but I don't know, a lot of people. He said, they were gripped with this terrible fear. Oh my gosh, it's Joseph. He's gonna wipe us out. He's got in for us. We really tried to get rid of him. We didn't. Now he's going to get us good. Ki amru came. He's going to be our enemy, and he's going to want to take revenge. Just like, and doesn't want to. He's like, you're not my brothers. You can't possibly be my brothers. How could you be my brothers? Just like they did to him. The only way they were able to sell him was by making believe that he wasn't their brother. Now they're afraid he's going to turn the tables on them and make believe he's not their brother, and that's it. That's why he begins this after they don't answer him. He says, I'm Yosef Achichem. I'm Yosef, your brother. That you sold me. Even though now he's saying, you couldn't pick the worst place to send me than Egypt, where they have all this licentiousness. That's the only place you could figure out. You had to find a caravan going specifically to Egypt to sell me. Nonetheless, I'm still your brother. And don't be upset that you sold me here to Egypt. Because as a result, I am able to perceive that this entire sequence of events, that I had to end up in this licentious place of lewdness and garbage, the Karali Mikra, Potiphar, and all that happened to me with Potiphar's wife, I was able to withstand all of this temptation. And it's only because Hashem was testing me to see if I was worthy that I'm now able to be the shepherd of Israel who can feed and support everybody. Okay? Okay. If I hadn't been in such a terrible place, I'm sure God would have saved you from this famine, Yosef says. But it's possible somebody else would have gotten that the reward for being the one who saved you. Now you sold me to this terrible place. Hashem gave me the zechut to be able to be the one who saves everybody from this famine. The fact that I was stuck in Egypt, it's only by the fact that I was sold to Egypt that Hashem elevated me and gave me the merit to be the one who saved Am Yisrael. Chazal Omer, however, and I'm going to finish with this. Chazal have some famous in the Gemara as well as the Midrash. I quote it here from the Midrash Rabbah. Shemi b'hala zu yikach limud al yom hadin. That we need to take from this confusion, embarrassment that the brothers felt when Yosef says, I'm Joseph, we have to learn what's going to happen to us when we get to Shemayim and at the end of our 120 years. Elazar ben Azariah says, Vai lanu miyom hadin, woe to us on the day of judgment. Vai lanu miyom hatochecha, woe to us on the day that we receive rebuke. And here's how he brings this. Uma Yosef, Yosef lo yochel. Here we have Joseph, a human being, telling his brothers, I'm Joseph. And they had no response. They couldn't fathom it. They had no way to respond to him. When we're standing in front of God in judgment, how much more will we not be able to answer him? And as the Navi says, what are we going to do on the day Hashem reminds us of all of things? As I mentioned above, he says, the brothers thought that by asking, is my father alive, he was reminding them of their sin. What is a person going to do when Hashem tells him about all the things that he's done in his lifetime? And we're going to all have to seal all of our events in front of God and say, yep, this is what we did. And that's where Rebbe Elazar ben Azariah says, this is why the Torah tells us this whole story that his brothers were completely and totally flabbergasted. That the wise person will always keep in his heart the awe that we have, the trembling that we have when we will approach God on the day of judgment. And to learn a kal v'chomer from Yosef and his brothers in this story. And I think there's a very, very powerful lesson here. As I said, lots of questions that are not answered. What was Yosef thinking? Was Yosef planning on revealing himself? By the way, I'll just take like 30 seconds. I'm not going to go any further with the parshanim. But there are parshanim who suggest that Yosef really had no intent of telling the brothers until they brought Jacob down. Because again, he felt, in his opinion, that his dreams were prophetic dreams. And he, as the prophet, had an obligation to try to make them happen. That's why he forced them to bring Benjamin down. Because when they come to Baal the first time, there are only 10 of them. In the dream, there were 11 of them. Okay, and then he has to bring his father down because there are 11 stars plus the sun and the moon. So he's got to get his father to come down. So he's trying to figure out, play this against how he's going to get the brothers to bring their father down. And presumably, if Judah hadn't gotten up and spoken, he was going to keep Benjamin as a hostage and force them to bring Jacob down. After Yehuda speaks, he's not able to hold himself back and reveals himself to his brother. That's one opinion. That's on one end of the spectrum. The other end of the spectrum says that it's through Yehuda's words that he hears about his father, because there's one opinion, and I personally don't ascribe to this, but I haven't read it. I heard about it from my son who explained this to me. He says one of the Rebbeim, I think it's from Sam, it says that Yosef for 22 years was not sure whether his father was part of the plot of his brothers to sell him, because his father was the one who sent him all alone to his brothers, knowing that his brothers hated him. So he kind of had. Now, I personally don't like that shot. I'll tell you why. Because Yosef's relationship with his father was such that I cannot imagine Yosef's expecting his father of wanting to get rid of him. That's my personal opinion. I'm telling you what I think it's what Samek says. Why did Jacob send him away? Because why did Jacob send him? Again, I'll tell you the answer very simply, because God needed this to happen. And that's why the Navi says, it's interesting, because way back in parshat VaYigash, when Jacob sends him, it says, "Vayishlacheu me'emek Chevron." I've been to Chevron. It's not in an emek. There's no valley in Chevron. And Rashi says the same exact thing. Chevron's up in the mountains. Okay, it's Harei Chevron, the mountains of Chevron. Rashi says, Omek, the emek, the word emek there means omek, the depth. It was to fulfill, and he quotes the Midrash, that the reason that Yaakov sends Yosef is to fulfill what God told to Abraham, that your children are going to be enslaved and descendants for 400 years. And it's part of God's way of ensuring that the Jewish people survive. Because had we stayed in Canaan, there's a very high probability that we would have not scattered, that we would have been absorbed into the local population and lost our identity. In Egypt, the Egyptians were so different than the Jews, than the Jacob and his family, that we read last week. The Egyptians wouldn't even break bread with a Jew because they were sheep worshippers and they were sheep herders who ate sheep. So there was a natural animosity and a natural barrier to assimilating into the local population. That was why God brings us to Egypt, so that we can survive as an independent nation and grow. Okay, so that's part and parcel of the whole story. The other question, and I sort of raised, I'll just give one very brief answer, although I've already sort of alluded to it. Why didn't Joseph contact his father? According to that opinion of Rav Samet, the reason Joseph doesn't contact his father, he's not really sure whether his father really wants him back. Okay? Which, as I said, I have a problem with that shot, because I know that Yosef and his father had such a strong relationship, I cannot imagine that. But, as I said, that's his parshanut. The Medrash gives this really fascinating reason as to why Joseph never sends a message. He says that when the brothers sold Joseph, they declared a cherem on anybody who would tell Yaakov. And not only that, and the question is, wait a minute, how can you declare a cherem? You need a minion. There were only 9 brothers, because Reuben had already gone and Binyamin was never there. And the Medrash wants to suggest that the 10th person of the cherem was God himself. Okay? And Yosef is bound by the cherem, because it's been established by 10 people. That's a wonderful midrash. It's a great midrash. It answers the question, but it doesn't answer the question. Okay? So I'm going to leave it at that, and I'm just going to say that, as I said, like all of the parashot in Bereshit, it raises more questions than we can answer. And that's why we have to continue year after year going through all these parashot, studying them in depth, because there are so many questions, and we need to know the answers, because the Torah is writing them so that we can learn what we're supposed to be learning. And I think, as I said, here, one of the things we have to understand in the whole Yosef story is how important it is for us to be able to get along with each other. When we are against each other, we can't defeat anybody. When we're together, we can stand up and we can be successful as a nation. We have to be united, but we also have to be united understanding that we're trying to grow in the service of Hashem and be an Or LaGoyim. And when we are able to do that, then when we individually and collectively feel that way, then perhaps we will not have to feel that same shuddering that the brothers felt when we faced the Almighty after 120 years, if we have been true to our mission and trying to help the rest of the world acknowledge God. And through that, perhaps we will ultimately bring the redemption. Thank you all. I open it up at this point for questions, comments, or feedback, and apologize for the fact that I've overrun my time already.
Just quickly.
Go ahead.
I understand he had to make the dream. So why couldn't he just say it sooner?
Why couldn't Yosef say what sooner? Oh, Father. Oh, good question. Lois's question very simply is, why couldn't, if Yosef is trying to get the dream fulfilled, why didn't he just tell them, bring Benjamin and my father, otherwise I'm not going to let you go, let him go? Great question. There's a whole different school of thought in terms of what that was. I'm gonna stop here, but I will, if you have a minute, Lois, wait, okay? All right. Thank you all for joining. Have a good rest of the week. Shabbat shalom, Ezra Hashem. We will try again next week. I'm trying to remember one of these weeks. I'm going to have to switch from Tuesday to Wednesday. I'm not sure if that's next week, but if there is, I will try to let everybody know. But assume it's Wednesday night, unless further notice. Oh, I think it's the following week. I have something Wednesday night. Anyway, Laila Tov, Shabbat shalom, and take good care.